Hey everybody, this is Dr. Vince again from FTR. So, past 3 videos I've covered sideline leg raise, I've covered clams, I covered a little bit of the chair squat. So those are the basic exercises. Now we're going to start to change things up a little bit. Today's exercise that I'm going to cover is the lunge. So this is unilateral strengthening. When you have a significant asymmetry left to right, you want to start doing a little bit more unilateral training, or you need to do motor control training to where if you're training on both feet, you should be doing it in a mirror or someplace where you can start to see those deviations and correct them as they're occurring to relearn that pattern. The lunge is great for strengthening one leg at a time, and it's also great for flexibility if you learn how to use it correctly, and that's one of the other things that we're going to be covering today. So for the lunge, first you want to come down, take the step down. If the back knee touches, you know, there's some people that say the knee shouldn't touch because you don't want the compression on the kneecap itself. I'm a big fan of no compression on the kneecap. It's not meant to be a weight-bearing joint, but again, the touch shouldn't be weight-bearing over it. It should just be a light touch. So what you just saw me do there was kind of land on it. Okay, that's not what we're looking for. Ideally, it should be so light that it just brushes the floor and then right back up. There's 2 types of lunges that you're gonna see. One is this forward walking lunge where, gosh, okay, I'm a meathead. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm a power lifter back in the days, and I used to train bodybuilders. The guy who made this parking lot lunge famous is Ronnie Coleman. I can remember watching a video of him doing lunges out in the parking lot with 315 pounds. But the walking lunge literally looks like this. This is something you'll see in a lot of gyms where they just do a lunge, walk forward, do a lunge, walk forward. I'm not a huge fan of that forward walking lunge just because with me, I tend to feel that a ton in my quads, the front part of my thigh. I tend to be heavy quad dominant, which means that when I do squats or deadlifts, I like to use my quads. So I need to emphasize more of my hamstrings, more of my glutes. When I do a rear lunge, instead of the forward walking, more of this one, I tend to feel that one a lot more in my glutes and hamstrings. If you watch what happens, I'm going to break this down just a little bit. I won't go too much into depth. We look at knee closure, hip closure, right? If I do this forward lunge, look at how closed the knee becomes compared to the hip. The hip is more upright, the knee is very closed. Now if I do a back lunge, here the knee is more open, the hip becomes more closed. Which means that I go through more movement at my hip with this rear lunge than I go through movement at my knee with the rear lunge. The more one joint moves, the more those muscles around that joint have to work. Since I want to emphasize these muscles, I want more movement at my hip than I do at my knee because I tend to move more at my knee than at my hip. You might have to listen to that 2 or 3 times in order for all that to make sense, but it made sense to me. If you have any questions, comment below. Anyway, getting back to it. So with the lunge, what we're looking for is making sure that the knee is not buckling inward. It's hard for me to even do that now. To make sure that the knee is not buckling inward, okay? We got to make sure that you're utilizing your hips and keeping your knee at least over your foot. What we know is that if the knee is traveling inward, you may not be utilizing your hips correctly, okay? And those weak hips have been shown, I've talked about it before, weak hips shown to have impact on back pain, impact on knee pain, impact on balance. So you want to make sure that you can at least do this. If you choose to do this, that's a little bit different. There are some people that actually advocate for doing this in the bottom position of a squat or the bottom position of a lunge. Not too many, but the general consensus is we want the knee over the foot and then stand back up. The other thing that you'll hear talked about in gym settings with lunges is we want to keep the knee from going over the toes because that puts too much stress on the knees. There's no hard research to talk about that. That's more one of those old wives' tale tradition-based teachings. It was based off a study, I think, in the 1960s, where they did this on a skeletal model without muscles or ligaments or any of the soft tissues to support the knee. So if you're doing this, just understand that you're working the muscles on the thigh, front part of the thigh, more so than you're working the muscles on the back part of the hip, because your knee is going to go through more motion in order for you to stand up. Now let's talk about some of the variations of the lunge that you can do. If doing a regular lunge is a little too hard, you could put something down on the floor and do a lunge down to that with that back thigh, back knee touching the surface that's on the floor. It's going to limit your range of motion. You may not be able to see it as much when I do it off of one pad, but give me a second. I'm going to walk out of the screen for a second. You'll still hear my voice. It's trailing in the distance. No, here I come. If I throw 2 pads down, then it becomes obvious that I'm not going down as low, right? If I'm not going down as low, it means that I'm not going through a greater range of motion. We talked before that range of motion is one of the variables that you can change. If an exercise is too hard, you can decrease the range of motion of the exercise. You'll get stronger in a shorter range. At some point, you may want to go back and recapture that full range. It's going to be based off of the goals that you have for that specific movement. So again, I can make it easier by doing this rear knee elevated. Okay, I don't want to say rear foot because that's coming up in a second. Rear knee elevated makes the exercise easier because it's a shorter range of motion. Rear foot elevated will make the exercise harder because it forces you to use your mobility a little bit different. So if I go rear foot elevated, I don't know if you can still see me. I'll step back a little bit. If I go rear foot elevated, it's also known as a Bulgarian split squat. I actually really like this exercise. Okay, and it's one leg forward, lunge position, and you drop down. Now you see it's a lot further down for me to get that knee down. I close the hip down a lot more. I help to stabilize the back because I don't move the pelvis as much. And then right back up, okay? A lot harder, especially for those people who have tight hip flexors from prolonged sitting, maybe walking in a bent over position, doing a lot of stuff in this position, you know, digging. My dad was a ditch digger for the laborers, so he was bent over like this for a long period of time. Needless to say, got some back pain. If you have tight hip flexors, that might be a little bit more difficult for you. Next, you can do a front foot elevated lunge. Okay, this is not as big of a range of motion. Here and back, this is going to be a lot easier. You can typically turn this into a step up. I don't have a step up pulled out. I wasn't planning on going there. So you can turn that into a step up, which would then increase the range of motion that you're going through your hip. If you have any questions, comment below. I'm not sure if I had anything else to talk about on the lunge, but if you have anything to talk about, comment below. I'll throw another video out later. Salute. Have a good day.